Bro, you're already on the fucking list, bro. You're gonna get cooked by the end of the week. I'm just kidding. This video is the most disturbing human experiment ever. What was it called again? Unit 731, is that what y'all said?
When discussing humanity's history and tales from our past,
So
it's often
this I don't think I really know about, and I don't know facts about it and things around it. So I'm gonna stay back on my personal opinion. But let's get into it.
to look at those stories through a lens of superiority. After all, in the modern age, people have more information and are more connected to each other than they ever have been before. So when we look back
Okay.
at tragedies and atrocities that people have committed, it's easy to apply a label of ignorance and just say that they weren't in the same position that we are now, so it makes sense that they did the things they did. But regardless of any label or explanation
Turn up a little, I got you.
come up with, it's hard to justify the evils of Unit 731. Unit 731 was
Why is it not going all the way full?
a
What the
public
fuck?
health department within Japan during World War II. Although now we know, as the years have revealed, Unit 731 was in actuality perhaps the most disturbing case of human experimentation ever.
That good?
The actions that Unit 731 did for the perseverance of a country and an idea is hard to imagine any person doing for whatever selfish reason, much less the entire efforts of a military and government. So today, we're going to talk about the history and tragedy of Unit 731, as well as the incredible injustice that befell everything in the end. Now, before we get started, I just want to mention that while I am going to be careful with my language and not be too explicit with some of my wording or details, the topics we're going to be broaching still relate to intense violence against women, children, prisoners of war, civilians, and all manner of executions, both standard and barbaric. And while I do think it's important to talk about these things, not only for the victims who were destroyed by this tragedy, but also so that the evils that were done by man are never forgotten lest they be repeated.
By the way, anybody that's watching, any reacts that I do like this, I post on my YouTube, on my second channel. So if y'all want to peep that shit, you're more than welcome. Here, I'll give y'all the link in my... I think it's this. It's not? Nah, that's crazy, bro. We need a link for that. What am I doing? Yeah, go into this. That's where all my socials are, and you'll find my second channel.
While I think all that's important, I also want to say that if you are sensitive to these topics, it's not worth your own health and mentality. So again, if this video is something that you don't want to deal with, or if some of the topics that I briefly mentioned are too intense, feel free to click off now. And also, for those who are sticking around, the video is going to be a bummer. There's not a lot of jokes or fun to be had with this one. Like I said, I think it's important to talk about, but it's just going to be sad
A wedgie.
and a lot. And I can't wait to get done filming this so that I don't have to think
Installations.
about it.
Okay,
and I can just
Crash.
push
Okay.
all this trauma onto you all. Before we get into
Push
that,
all of this
and it's
trauma.
just, sad for the next half hour, however long this video is, why not do something a little quirky, a little weird right now to kind of lighten the mood a bit? Like, I don't know, maybe I could try to radicalize my audience. So with that out of the way, let's get into something that really matters. The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. But do you know what hasn't been a disaster? Raid Shadow Legends! Raid is back and better
I knew
than
something
ever
like
because
that was
now
coming.
they're
I
bringing
knew
the
it. I
new
fucking knew it.
animated limited series.
When he
Raid
switched
Call of
up
the
there, I was
Ark.
like, yeah,
The most.
there's
Hope you all
an
check
ad
them out.
coming.
QR code and link in the description, and we are back to the video. We are gonna go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. So the
It's
history of
always
Japanese
or fucking
warfare
War
and
Thunder or
Japanese
some
government
shit,
that
bro.
led up to the creation of Unit 731 is pretty extensive,
Fuck.
but I want to keep it to what's relevant to the events of World War II. To set the stage, in 1925, the Geneva Convention banned the use of biological and chemical weapons. This was done because during World War I, one of the most brutal parts of trench warfare was the use of chemical weapons. And while this treaty deterred several nations from using it altogether, not every nation was in agreement with the Geneva Convention, one of these being Imperial
World of
Japan.
Tanks,
Now,
yep.
as you're going to see in a moment, Imperial Japan was not one to shy away from brutality. And as it related to chemical and biological weapons, them being banned didn't mean they weren't going to use them, it just meant they were going to be very careful about how they use them. And during the 1930s, Japanese researchers began to dig into the possibilities of biological warfare. To make sure we're all on the same page, by biological warfare in this context, I'm referring to things like weaponizing diseases or using infections as a battle implement. The issue with this was, or at least the issue from the Japanese government's perspective, is it's hard to test the feasibility or practicality of biological weapons if you don't have a population or group of people to test said weapons on. Also during the 1930s, Japan began to
That, bro,
attack the
that's
mainland.
what makes me wonder, like, what happened with, like, COVID? Was, like, COVID, like, literally what he just said?
Of China. At this time in history, China was really struggling to reach the modern age, at least technologically, and a lot of their defensive forces were made up of small communities and bands of soldiers.
Oh, yeah, cheers.
Whereas, in opposition to them, Japan had an incredibly strong military force. So, most of the conquest of China is called a conquest because the Chinese would try to put up the best fight they could, but would just keep getting destroyed
Different?
by the
Okay,
Japanese
okay.
government at every turn. So we see all these pieces moving on the board. Japan is interested in biological and chemical warfare, and they're starting to make headway into the Chinese mainland. And again, this is all like a decade before World War II would even begin. Around this time, the Japanese Surgeon General named Shiro Ishii came forward and said that Japan needs to make
So this is kind of around the time when Amelia Earhart would have gone missing then. They didn't really have great communications for shit back then, bro. They used, like, very, very shit
headway
systems.
into biological warfare because everyone could tell a war was on the horizon. and
Dr.
if Japan
Doofenshmirtz
doesn't get
weaponized,
to
like,
it first,
STDs and shit,
then
I
one
think.
of the other powers,
Oh my
like
God.
the United States, might beat them to it. The Japanese government, being in agreement at this concept of a biological arms race, in 1932 appointed Ishii as the head of the Army Epidemic Prevention Research Laboratory. Publicly, the purpose of this laboratory was to investigate cures for illnesses and diseases that could befall a military force, when in actuality, they were trying to find new ways to make illness befall a military force. This group also had a division within part of the Japanese-controlled area of China. The unit there in
Facts.
China was known as the Togo Unit and was a part of this biological warfare initiative.
Yes,
Something
actually.
else to keep in mind whenever we talk about this. So, at this point in history, Imperial Japan was especially prejudiced against anything that wasn't Imperial Japan. A
Yeah.
lot of the ideas that were made manifest through these experiments and Japan's actions in World War II come from a cultural sense of superiority. As a matter of fact, a superiority that's so strong, it justifies taking over and controlling everyone else. Because of that, several members of
Yeah,
the
that's
Japanese
wild.
government and military saw anyone who
Are you
opposed
losing
them
it?
as
Yeah,
less
maybe a
than
little bit.
human, or at least less than Japanese. And if you'll remember what I mentioned earlier, it's hard to test biological weapons without test subjects. So the Togo unit decided early on that the perfect way to test these new weapons and ideas was with residents of mainland China. Initially, this research
Hey,
was
yo.
carried out at a location known as the Zongma Fortress.
Do we need a
The
private
fortress
meeting?
was an old castle-like structure that was built in Manchuria.
Now you sound like
China,
you're
and
gonna,
was
like, take me out or
repurposed
something,
for
bro.
the
You sound like
Togo
you're
unit's needs. The early
CIA.
experiments at the Zongma Fortress
Look out of here.
typically consisted of bringing in civilians from mainland China and throwing them in the various rooms
Pentagon.
of the fortress that were converted into prison cells. Inside of these cells, initially, the subjects would be fed well and kept up to good health, and then at that point, the experimentation could begin. Taking these now healthy test subjects,
What are they
the
doing to
researchers
them?
would then do things like slowly bleed them out over the course of several days, or dehydrate or starve them to see what the effects of the body
Bruh.
would be and how long the subject could survive.
That's
Again, this was all done in the name
fucked.
of better understanding the limits of the human body. During the course of these tests, they would also be subjected to various
What are you yapping on
diseases
about,
like
Chop?
the bubonic plague, and at various stages of infection, the subjects would be vivisected or a live dissection, most often while the subject was still conscious. This was done to see firsthand what the effects of certain diseases do to someone's internal system.
Bro,
These
what the
experiments were
fuck?
pale in comparison to what this group of researchers would go on to do. Things were kind of tenuous at the Zongma Fortress. Again, at this point, it's a group of researchers, not soldiers, who are doing this. And while a part of the Japanese government,
Impeccable
it isn't
webcam
a
placement.
one-to-one with the Japanese military. So because of that, there were a few accidents that occurred at the facility. In 1934, there was a prison break, and a bunch of the prisoners escaped out into the Chinese countryside. In 1935, there was an explosion, and a large part of the fortress was burnt. But in spite of these incidents, the Japanese government liked the concept of these new means of warfare. So in 1936, the Japanese government gave them more funding and more access to military reserves, which not only included a lot of money, but things like Japanese soldiers for guard duty, or Japanese prisoners for experimentation. When Shiro Ishii's group, which again at the time all of this was referred to as the Army Epidemic Prevention Research Laboratory, whenever that group was brought into
The guy from
Japanese
Split?
government, it was
What the
renamed by
fuck?
Hirohito as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. So again, a word to imply to the public that the group's entire purpose is to make sure that everyone's safe.
I feel
was
like I'm
at
actually a
this point
skinwalker.
that
Come
Ishii's
outside real
group was
quick.
officially given the designation of Unit 731.
Oh, W.
The group then focused all of their efforts into China because, again,
Oh, okay,
test
so this is the
Ishii's
unit.
group was officially
What
given
the
the designation of Unit 731. The group then focused all of their efforts into China because, again, that's where most of the test subjects were coming from. But instead of going back to the Zongma Fortress, they now went to a brand new Japanese military research facility. This facility was a massive complex that had over 150 buildings and encompassed over 2 square miles. One of the fascinating
Holy.
things to note about the structure of the building is there was this large, like, welcome center or area that supposedly anyone who enters the complex has to go through, but that was actually a fake building that was just done for publicity purposes, because in actuality there was an underground tunnel that they would shuttle prisoners in and out of outside of the public view. So not only
What the
was the
fuck?
name and purpose of the facility a lie, but the actual structure and some of the buildings of the facility were a lie as well, as the majority of experiments took place in these underground tunnels and cells. Now, into the late 30s, as Japan began to take over more of China, there were other facilities that began to pop up that were also a part of Unit 731, but the primary experiments and travesties that happened took place at this large facility located near Pingfang. And by 1939, Unit 731 consisted of over 10,000 individuals. Now, not all of
Holy.
these 10,000 members were a part of human experimentation. You gotta understand, Unit 731 is encompassing the way diseases could be treated, how diseases may be made manifest, and a lot of the experiments that were happening at these other facilities might have been legitimate or had some purpose other than torture. But as far as
Right.
the events that happened at the primary
For
facility
that crash.
we talked
I'm actually
about,
gonna take a piss too, y'all. Let's take a quick little.
those were all pretty evil. The excuse
Oh, yeah,
for
it
this
was
large
great.
facility as to why they bring in so many Chinese prisoners and exist out here in the middle of the woods away from public eyes is that they were a part of lumber production. So the code name given to experiments that had to do with human experimentation was called Maruta, because Maruta is Japanese for logs. And it was kind of an in-joke in the facility that instead of referring to the prisoners and subjects as prisoners and subjects, they would be called logs. Like, for example,
Bruh.
how many logs were cut down today? Or do the logs look healthy? This whole
Bro.
thing would keep up through a lot of Unit 731's research. For example, several of the researchers
so
who
bad.
performed
Oh
the
my
experiments
God.
on prisoners firsthand
Holy fuck.
published their findings, but they would publish them saying that it was a long-tailed primate that they did it to, or in some instances even referring to these subjects as Manchurian monkeys. Again, the Japanese government knew what was happening,
Bro.
but the rest of the world didn't, and the Japanese government would prefer to keep it that way. A lot of the numbers vary, considering several researchers probably came and
I did
went
indeed.
during the height of World War II whenever these experiments were at their worst, but at least one point, Unit 731 had about 300 researchers as a part of the Maruta or human experiments at this primary facility. So, what kind of experiments were happening here at this
So what I've
primary
gathered from this is they were heavily racist and they did not give a fuck about anybody but the Japanese. Got it.
facility?
Like,
Unit
holy
731?
fuck.
that I have been trying to put off talking about and talking about all the other aspects of it so I don't have to get to it. And why is it regarded by many to be the worst example of human experimentation, or by some, the worst example of government action against a population ever? So I guess I need to talk about that now. And this is your final warning. Click off if you don't want to hear about it, and I don't blame you. So let's start with how the prisoners got to the facility in the first place. As mentioned, the majority of the subjects were people from the Chinese mainland. While the majority of these were Chinese people, there were also several Russians and Mongolians and Koreans who were captured as well as several Japanese political prisoners who were transferred to the facility as well. They would be transported to the front of the facility in a vehicle that had no windows, so that if there ever was an escape or if they were ever let out for whatever reason, they couldn't testify where the facility is even located. And then once they got to the facility, they were bagged and taken to the aforementioned underground tunnels. From there, they were placed into an underground cell. Most of them on their way in would be given a vaccine for their own health upon entry, when in actuality they were being injected with various diseases, and the disease would change based on whatever study the researchers were currently carrying out. Exact estimates of how many people were taken prisoner are kind of nebulous. On the most conservative end of the spectrum, it's about 3,000, but that number could be as high as 30 or 40,000.
Oh, they don't even know.
However many the number
Yo!
might be, no one ever survived the Unit 731 experiments. The reason no one's sure how many died in the first place, and it took so long for this information to come out, is because no one that ever walked into that building ever walked back out. So what happened to these prisoners? Well, the thing I mentioned that happened at the Togo facility, the stuff about them being made
Yeah, that's a lot of
healthy just so
people.
they could be bled out and dehydrated, that was still happening, but that was the least of the prisoners' worries. The average lifespan of a prisoner at Unit 731 was about 2 months. If you were lucky, then you were killed quickly in one of the conventional weapon experiments. These experiments were exactly what they sound like. They would take several of the prisoners and place them in a courtyard. One of the things they would do is they would place people in rings at various distances from each other and then throw a hand grenade in the middle to see what lethality the grenade had out to these different rings of people. They would set people on fire with flamethrowers and see how long it took them to burn up. They would line up people in a straight row and then
that's
shoot them
fucked.
with rifles and pistols to see the penetration capability. They would sharpen bladed weapons to various degrees to see how sharp a knife needed to be to fully cut through somebody. And of course, as mentioned, this was all done to participants who were fully awake and conscious of the death they experienced. And again, that's
So-
if you were lucky.
And these aren't even like, would you call them like bad people, or these are people that are literally just regular populate, like from the population of China? I missed that part. Are they like, what the fuck? Like what?
If you were unlucky, then you
So
were
just that dude, that's fucked.
a part of the disease trials. So the disease trials.
How
were
does more
similar
people
to the
not
things
talk about
mentioned
this?
in the Togo unit, where they would infect people with things like the plague and then dissect them while they're alive to see the various stages of infection within the body. But they had been doing the bubonic plague research
That
for
shit army,
years
yeah.
at this point. Again, the time period we're talking about now is generally like 1940, 1941. So
I was
the
gonna guess
plague
like 37.
research has moved on to much larger demographics. Again, a lot of the records of Unit 731 were destroyed at the end of the war, but from what we know, there was at least 12 field tests of things like the bubonic plague, and 11 of them took place in Chinese cities. So Unit 731 researchers would deposit plague-infected fleas into the middle of a Chinese populace, or infect their wells and homes with things like typhoid.
fuck,
And then
man?
these researchers would watch from a distance and then walk through these decayed cities in their sterile garbs, recording the number of casualties. At the very least, tens of thousands of people died immediately from these large-scale weapon tests. Entire countrysides of people were destroyed by infected fleas that were simply thrown out in a clay pot. Back at the facility, the feasibility of chemical and biological weapons was being tested as well. They would have prisoners stand out in
That's
fields wearing
fucked.
different layers of protection, from completely naked to normal clothes to gas masks and what have you. And then they would just bombard them with things like mustard gas or sulfur gas and see how long it takes them to die at whatever stage of protection they're in. Another thing that the researchers were interested in was weaponizing venereal diseases. So to do this, they purposefully infected a bunch of people with STDs. However, the injections of the STDs tended to not take properly, so as an alternative, male and female prisoners were led into cells and then at gunpoint forced to transfer the diseases. And as
That's
mentioned
so
previously, at
fucked.
various stages of the
What the
disease's
fuck, bro?
progression, the individual would be vivisected to see what it's doing to the body. And even all of that is
And those
with
fucking stupid ass guards don't even realize what they're doing.
in the
fucking
realm
idiots,
of
bro.
feasibility.
Holy
as
fuck.
evil, as depraved, as
That is so
monstrous as it is, you can wrap your head around the concept of,
Wow.
okay, well, if someone really, really believed that the people they were torturing aren't really people, and that this is all for the greater good, you can see a purpose, to them at least, they can see a purpose at the end of the tunnel as to why they're doing this, right? Well, that's before we get into what I can only describe as Machiavellian torture methods. Because sure, they're wanting to use new diseases in the war, so they gotta test those, right? But some of the other stuff they did was simply no other explanation than depravity, or at least none other than I can think of. So to just read off a few of the things that happened at Unit 731, and again, these are things that records were not destroyed of, and people would later confess to. So if it's possible, it is very likely that worse stuff than this happened.
Yeah, this
as
is
well.
wild.
People were cut open while alive and had various organs removed before they were stitched back up to just see what would happen. So, for example, cutting out someone's lower GI tract to see how long it takes them to die from that. Taking out someone's stomach and attaching their gut to their throat to see what that does. People had their limbs cut off, in some cases to visualize how long it took for someone to bleed out, but in other cases, they would saw off both arms and then switch the shoulder that the arm was attached to just to see if the body could reattach it. People were placed inside
Bruh.
of low pressure chambers and the pressure cranked up to see how long it took for things like their eyes to fly out or their chest to implode. People were hung upside down by ropes tied.
Now I understand why. Now I understand. Yeah.
To their ankles to see
Wow.
how long it took them to die from blood pressure to the head. People had very large and heavy objects like
In World War II, they had like camps, here in BC, and if you were Japanese, you had to go to them. Like even if you were Canadian. Now I understand.
crates and rocks dropped on them to see
Pretty
how
much,
force
but
it
they
took
weren't
to
like
kill
that.
someone
Like,
from
they
being
weren't-
crushed.
They just had them in certain areas because of what the fuck was going on. You know what I mean?
People were placed inside
Yeah,
of
no,
centrifuges,
that's-
and the speed ramped up until they were dead
That's fucked.
to see how much
But that's why they had them, is because of that. Literally.
it took to kill someone. And as depressing as it is, I should also mention the fact that they determined that children had a lower tolerance to it than adults. People were given intravenous injections of things like horse blood and seawater, again, just to see what would happen.
Oh,
People had
fuck.
their limbs placed in very cold
Yeah.
buckets of water until their
Well, now I see why, bro. Because bro, what the fuck? What the fuck? I gotta say it, bro. I'm glad y'all have been on our side for a while. Fuck all the trade bullshit. That's you can deal with that. You know what I mean? This is different. This is something that is gonna be this is fucked.
limbs were
No
removed,
wonder World War
and
II was so
according to
fucked up.
researchers, it
Holy
felt and
fuck,
sounded
man.
as if it
And the war crimes and Canadians the shit that they did and what the
wood, and then
Oh
the
my
limb would
God,
either
bro.
be crushed to see
Now
what
I
the damage
understand.
of a frozen limb that becomes injured might be. They were set on fire to see if anything could be recovered from that. They tested various ways to warm someone back up after they were frozen to that degree. According to Ishii himself, again the lead researcher, they did various experiments where they took babies that were under a month old and
Don't fuck with our
placed
boats,
them
bro.
in freezing water and freezing elements just to see how long it took them to die of hypothermia. I'm going to read this next one from an excerpt from Hal Gold.
With South Africa about these guys were different level. Yeah, this is fucked. It's like you touch our boats. Okay, like the thing where I would kind of draw the line is if you were doing these tests, minus them having like forcing people to have sex and shit. Like, yeah, obviously, like you understand what I mean. Like doing tests on people that are like fucking psychos, like killers, like you know what I mean. People that are in jail for very, very bad crimes. Like that's one thing, but this is a totally different level.
He wrote a book called Japan's Infamous Unit 731, which is a book breaking down this whole topic. And Hal says in one portion, it was said that
And there were camps for Canadians because they were also very fucked up.
a small
Really?
number
Oh,
of
yeah,
these
oh, yeah.
poor men,
We
women,
were.
and
Yeah,
children
we were
who became
fucked.
Marudas were also mummified alive in total
A lot of the shit that they did when they went over was very wild. Like when they fucking, what's it called? What's the word when they like take back a location? They someone's gonna say it. Can't remember the name.
hydration experiments. They sweated
For the reason
themselves
for a lot
to
of the Geneva
death
Convention.
under
Yeah, yeah.
the heat of several hot, dry fans. At death, the corpses would weigh only about a fifth.
It's like Reclaim, but it's when like Canada took back what the fuck is it called, man? Canada's off leash wars before NATO. Here, I'll figure it out here. Colonize maybe. No, you were not wrong. Maybe colonize is more like oh my god, what the fuck is the name of the word? It's right on the tip of my tongue, bro. Fuck. Is it liberation? Maybe? I think it would be, it's different wording for us essentially because Canada was part of the Commonwealth and then we split. So like they're technically like our allies or our people. So we're kind of, yeah, liberating our own
Of their
liberation.
normal body
Yeah,
weight. And in
yeah,
some
okay.
cases, they would just decapitate people and take notes about it. It really
What the
is
fuck, bro?
bizarre the level of insanity this entails. Like, not only is it evil, but it's also so dumb, right? Like, if you just cut someone's head off, what are you even studying? Like I said, you know, of course it's evil. I'm not saying obviously that any of it was better than the others, but when
No,
a
I get what he's
military
saying.
test
Like,
a
what the
weapon, as evil as it is, you could think to yourself, okay, I understand why they did that, but some of these things, just like mummifying people, shattering their frozen limbs, leaving babies out to die, like, it's just, it's a strange debauchery. There's all these stories we hear about
Cheers.
that, like when Rome fell, there were these big swinger parties, and everyone would get high until they were dead, right? And a similar thing happened at the end of World War II in places like Nazi Germany. It's like they were like rapping on the gates of death, just going to go out in a blaze of glory. But this was a group of scientists
Cheers.
who did it for a couple decades. Like, how, or at least the intensity of it for 5 years, right? Like, we don't even have the excuse that they were about to die, or they thought they were just going to bust hell wide open. Like, it was just a continuous, thought out evil with seemingly no purpose that was signed off by members of governments, military, and the scientific community. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Perhaps the worst fate of anyone in Unit 731, or I'll say definitely the worst fate, was of the pregnancy studies. So as mentioned, the average lifespan of someone in Unit 731 was about 2 months. That number is skewed a bit because a lot of people who got there were killed within the first week, and things like the weapon testing. The reason that the average comes out to 2 months is because several of the studies were women who were, similar to the STDs, forcefully impregnated by either another prisoner at gunpoint or by one of the guards themselves.
That is
similar to the other diseases. A lot of them were dissected while alive at various points in their pregnancy just so they could look at how the fetus was developing. And in other cases, the women were effectively used as a breeding stock so that the researchers could have a fresh batch of infants for several of their tests.
Who was like the main guy behind all this? Because that bro was one twisted motherfucker.
I've looked at so many disturbing things. As a matter of fact, I knew a lot about Unit 731 because I covered it on the disturbing movie Iceberg. There is a film that I should have looked up before I started recording. There's 2 of them. There's Philosophy of a Knife, which I talked about in the disturbing movie Iceberg, and Men Behind the Sun. Both of them go into graphic detail about what happened at Unit 731. So I had seen those, so I'm like, wow, I already knew that, you know, the Japanese government did all of these evil, evil things to these people. And I, you know, knew about the Frozen trials, knew about the chemical weapon trials, even things like the pregnancy experiments.
Oh yeah, I think you're right.
So like, I knew all of that going into research for this. But the part that threw me off, that I wasn't expecting that I would see,
Raid Shadow Legends plug, that guy right there.
Typically, Wikipedia is a horrible source to get information from because people can just change stuff, and sometimes
that guy's
make it up.
one twisted
but whenever
motherfucker.
I was brushing up for this, I decided I'd look at
Fuck is wrong with him?
to see how they had it laid out, and they had an account that I hadn't read anywhere before that kind of stopped me in my tracks. There's at least one recorded instance of friendly social interaction between prisoners and Unit 731 staff. Technician Naokota Ishibashi interacted with 2 female prisoners. One prisoner was a 21-year-old Chinese woman, the other a Soviet girl who was 19 years of age. Ishibashi asked where she came from and learned that she was from Ukraine. The 2 prisoners told Ishibashi that they had not seen their faces in a mirror since being captured and begged him to get one. Ishibashi sneaked a mirror to them through a hole in the cell door. And that bothers me so much more than a lot of the other information I read. And the reason for that is because, again, I'm pretty desensitized to just brutality, right? Like the number of historical stories I read about that has to do with people getting, you know, skinned alive or, you know, brutal executions. Like that's just history, right? It's bloody, it's brutal, evil's always existed. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it is a lot easier.
I mean, it's just the human nature. Like, go back to fucking even before we had guns and shit. Like, what did we do? We would hunt things and skin them and fucking eat them and cook them and use their fucking fur to wear it. It's just a little bit more... Things are a little bit different, but it's not like those traits just go away from certain people, like fucking serial killers and shit. Exactly.
Right? Like, we take it for granted in the modern age because everyone's hyper connected by the internet, right? Like what you're watching this video on right now. And it's really easy for us to take human connection for granted. To just say, well, of course, I know that this other group of people is of equal worth as myself.
That's where I think, like, your upbringing and, like, what your I don't know, what you're like, what you go through as a kid, like what your parents do, and like just the environment around you. Like, you look at so many people, like so many serial killers and just people that are fucked. And you look at their past, and it's like, what the fuck?
I
Like,
talk to them.
like nobody. I don't think you're born a piece of shit. You're a baby. You're a fucking. You know what I mean? Like you,
I know
your brain hasn't even fucking developed yet.
several of them.
I don't know, my world of view is fucked due to my own personal life experiences,
What
but
I
that's what I
experienced.
mean. It's exactly what you've gone through in your life from when you were like after you were born to where you were a coherent, like, 5, 6, 7 years old, where you can start making choices for yourself. Like I have kids, so like it's a bit different,
And
right?
it's easy to go in with that mindset and
But like I strongly don't think you are born a piece of shit evil motherfucker. Like something changes over the course of when you're in your adolescence. It's almost like people are just not wired right. Like
look at history.
yeah, it could be from when they're born, but like you're not gonna be a fucking baby and what's on your mind is to just fucking murder everybody in the room. Like
And be like,
Nah.
oh, well, yeah, I could see how
they were bullied
the
so bad that they
Imperial
let the things that
Japanese
happen.
would,
Exactly.
you know,
And the problem here was there was no one till the evil motherfuckers know exactly.
be
And it was a lot different back then too, like in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and like you go all the way up until like we had TVs and phones and shit, like the first TVs and stuff. Like a lot of I don't know, parenting and shit was different. Like I swear to God, like like you think of like the average household back then was like the father, blue collar, drinks, smokes, is a piece of shit somewhat. You know what I mean? Like
so
that's just the
tricked by
first thing
their
that comes to your
government
head.
because
At
they
least
just
for
weren't
me.
as educated
And they were
weren't
racist
as
too,
enlightened as we
100%.
were, right? So it's easier to read stories about things like Unit 731.
Back then,
because you
especially.
kind of turn your
Holy
brain off,
shit!
and you're like, this was a
Not
group
like
of
it's
people
not like it's not bad now, but
who
holy
just
fuck!
didn't see the others as human, and that's why these tragedies were allowed to happen.
Yeah.
But then I read the story of a guard who saw two girls, young women, who wanted to remember what they looked like, and he recognized that they needed to feel something, that they needed to have that. So he broke rules and snuck them a mirror, and it made me
But I mean, like their idea of racism to me, that's not even being racist. That's just being like you're straight up alienating other races and killing them. Like that's not even being racist anymore. You're being a fucking
cold.
what the fuck is the word? Like
Because
you're
then-
being a literal
It's not just a person who
is it
let
it's
themselves
a
get
dictator or
tricked
whatever? I
and
don't even know what the
convinced
fucking
themselves
word
that they
is,
were
bro. But like
dealing
you're
with
being
cattle,
like a
right?
literal
Even-
piece of shit.
If these experiments were done with animals, I think we'd all still agree that it's evil and
Like you're not
terrible.
wrong.
But
It's
but
racist,
maybe that was his mindset, right? That he's just dealing with animals.
that's to the scale. That's
But to
not
read
even.
that
It's
he took
to me. That's not even racism anymore. That's just.
pity on a girl who wanted to, two girls who wanted
That's
to remember
fucked.
what they look like, terrified me. Because at least some of them were fully aware that these people were suffering and that was wrong. Not just that they were suffering and this was for the greater good, but that they were suffering.
Then why
and
is
something
you?
should be done.
Why are you
And
working
in
there
spite
then? Like
of
what?
that, it kept
Yeah.
happening. It was such a powerful force of government and people and the greater good that these tragedies kept going on, and the people who participated were well aware of the
What
pain
was
they were
happening and they just
inflicting
didn't care.
didn't stop it. And that is so much worse
Yeah, that
than
is
a group
fucked.
of people who were just following their orders
And didn't give a shit.
turned off their ears.
Yeah.
This guy still had ears, he was still listening, and he kept following those orders.
Yeah,
Along
that's
that
wild.
same note of kind of the
Well, I mean, you
illusion-
probably had to follow the orders, or you'd probably be killed. No. I'd expect, like, if they found out that he slipped those girls the mirror or something, would he not just be killed? Like,
of us versus them fading. There was one, I believe he was a guard there. Some
Nice.
said guard, some said he was like a research assistant. Someone who wasn't a high-ranking researcher named Yoshio Sudo, who got infected with the plague while he was there because, you know, everyone's dealing with these volatile diseases, so one of the workers gets infected. So they cut that guy open. Like, I guess they figured, well, he's a test subject now, we're not going to let him
wait,
get away.
what?
Who cares if he's Japanese? And they sliced him open too. It's in there. Some said guard, some said he was like a research assistant. Someone who wasn't a high-ranking researcher named Yoshio Sudo, who got infected with the plague while he was there because, you know, everyone's dealing with these volatile diseases, so one of the workers gets infected. So they cut that guy open.
That's
Like,
wild.
I guess they figured, well, he's a test subject now, we're not going to let
Bro.
him go to waste. Who cares if he's Japanese? And they sliced him open too. It's interesting, while kind of the,
What
the
the
Japanese
fuck,
government's
bro?
idea was, well, we're more important than they are, so
Yeah.
they can suffer. But we see these
Yeah,
glimpses.
time to join the log pile. Hope you understand that they would rather kill themselves than get captured. Oh, 100%. I mean, it goes back to like even before World War II, bro. Look at like samurais and shit, bro. They would literally stab themselves in the chest rather than getting captured. That's what a lot of the commanders in Japan would do too.
Japanese who are
They just
infected
kill
being treated the
themselves
same as everyone
rather
else
than
who's
getting
infected.
captured.
And also the Japanese recognizing that these people have emotions and feelings, and it makes
Look
the
at
situation so
fucking
much.
look at the fucking planes that would strike boats, bro. They would straight up just kamikaze them. There was imprints on side of fucking boats that were black from the plane smacking the side of it.
More scary.
That's fucked.
And I think one of the reasons it is so scary is because, again, we read a lot of stories like this, and it's comforting to think, oh, well, if they just knew better, right? Like, oh, well, maybe if they didn't have to struggle for resources as much, or maybe if they, maybe if they were allowed to experience humanity from this other side that they seem to hate so much, maybe then, you know, they wouldn't have had to do the awful things they did,
Yep.
right? It's easier to read a lot of history that way.
Yeah, that's wild.
But you see instances like that, and it kind of, it's dreadful, the idea that, sure, they had all that, it didn't change anything. Near the end of World War II, the Japanese government got desperate and decided to rely on Unit 731 for some kind of drastic measure against the United States. So, using the bubonic plague research that the Japanese had figured out, again by testing it on residents of China, the Japanese government put together a plan called Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night. The plan for this was to release the bubonic plague on San Francisco, and the attack was scheduled to take place on September the 22nd of 1945. But this plan never came to fruition because just over a month before September 22nd, America dropped the atomic bombs on Japan and ended the war. In these final days of the war, the members of Unit 731 realized that the war courts would not err in their favor and decided to destroy whatever evidence they could. And of course, this evidence began with the prisoners, who were forced to either ingest poison or be shot before the facility itself was set on fire and most of the documents and research destroyed. And as mentioned, no one who ever entered Unit 731 as a prisoner ever walked out. When Douglas MacArthur came to Japan after the war was over, he immediately heard whispers of things like human experimentation. After tracking down Ishii and the other leaders of Unit 731, they confessed that some degree of human experimentation took place, but wouldn't give MacArthur specific details. MacArthur threatened that if the remnants of 731 don't comply with the United States, then the United States would allow the Russians to judge the members of Unit 731. And I don't know if you know this, but especially right after World War II, you much wanted to be in a United States tribunal than a Russian tribunal. Because Americans typically ended with prison sentences, and Russians ended with rope. So a deal was struck between MacArthur.
We captured some German scientists and kind of forced them to build us nuclear bombs before they released the bubonic plague on us. Yeah, that would have been fucked.
Of Unit 731 that said if the researchers of 731.
What's crazy too is there was more loaded up. I know I've said this on stream before too, but they were straight up gonna nuke, like there was like 3 or 4 more nukes that they were gonna drop throughout the course of like the next 3 or 4 months. Like they were going to level that fucking place, which is fucked. And they were gonna be, one of them was gonna be bigger, which is fucked. Bro, like if they even drop 2 or 3 more, bro,
turned over all of their data
holy
to the United States, then they would be given
that's
full
fuck
immunity.
yeah. I'm surprised they did. I'm gonna keep it a stack.
Both sides agreed to that deal. Now, a couple things. The reason this deal was done is because one, and most importantly, America was afraid of what might happen if the Russians, who shortly after World War II began the Cold War and all of that, or the Cold War began between the United States and Russia, I should say.
What do you mean you're
America
not?
was afraid of what
they didn't give a fuck. That's why I'm like, what the fuck?
Happen
Who cares
if the
at that
Russians
point?
got their hand on all of that information. So it was more so done not so America could have biological weapons. I mean, we're not dropping plagues on populated cities, at least. That's what they want you to think. But really, it wasn't so much that we could have the information as much as we didn't want the Russians to have the information. And the other reason that the deal was taken is because, not really that I think it would have changed anything, but most of the details of what happened weren't known until decades after World War II ended. Like most of the stuff I read about came out in confessions in the 70s and 80s. And while MacArthur knew that there was some level of human experimentation, I mean, the data he was handed talked about how long it took for the researchers to witness someone dying of hypothermia, right? Like, he couldn't have been totally dumb to it, but at least the brutality and methods of it, they probably weren't aware of at the time. Not that I think that would have stopped them from it, but maybe they wouldn't have given full immunity. Maybe I just like to think they wouldn't have given them full immunity if they knew the full extent, but whatever, it still happened. Now keep in mind, to the public at that time, none of this had ever happened. To the Japanese government, to the Chinese, Unit 731
next to no
was a
survivors of
crazy
both instances.
conspiracy
Nah, I get what you're saying. I definitely see what you're saying. I just disagree.
If you thought anything weird was happening out there, because it's just for public health and lumber.
But the way they were, I'm just surprised they didn't just fucking say fuck it and go right to the bitter end.
Part of the deal
with the way they like this is fucked. They don't care.
The lie that nothing ever happened at Unit 731, and all of the members of Unit 731 could change their name, and America wouldn't release their identities to the public. So after America makes this whole plea deal with them, eventually
everyone was kind of like, oh shit, these guys need business. I mean, at that point, I don't think there was really much of any government left. Like, a lot of the dudes that were in the military, especially
the members of Unit 731,
I'm pretty sure a lot of them just died.
Didn't care to consult the U.S. over it. So Russia holds a trial, and they end up getting 12 people who they can confirm were.
Like a lot of them died.
And the sentences for those 12 who were found guilty were
so I guess it kind of makes sense then in that case. They're like surrendering, but it's literally just like the civilians pretty much left.
Labor camp.
For the most part.
Of which the most any of them served was 7 years. Now, if you know anything about Russian history with war crimes, the idea that these men weren't shot or hanged is absurd. Especially that they ended up just serving and America wouldn't release their. And they actually have a trial for some of the members of Unit 731, and as you can imagine, didn't care to consult the U.S. over it. So Russia holds a trial, and they end up getting 12 people who they can confirm were in Unit 731, and the sentences for those 12 who were found guilty were 2 to 25 years in a labor camp, of which the most any of them served was 7 years. Now, if you know anything about Russian history with war crimes, the idea that these men weren't shot or hanged is absurd. Especially that they ended up just serving 2 to 7 years, you know.
So wait, they're saying that in like the 60s and 70s, some of these motherfuckers were still walking around? Bro, what in the fuck?
Was 7 years.
Bro.
Now, if you know anything
why weren't they just off them all?
About Russian history with war crimes, the idea that these men weren't shot or hanged is absurd.
Yeah, like
especially that they ended up just serving 2 to 7 years, you know, respectively for different people. That is insane. How did that happen? Well, if you'll remember, the American deal with the Russians wasn't made official until like the 80s, and some researchers were going to talk about, you know, put in the work and made it come to be. So the fact that the Russians show up, they talk to the Japanese for a while, and only a few of the 731 researchers get like 5 years in prison, it is pretty much guaranteed that the Russians made a deal with the Japanese, very similar to the deal America made with them. So at the end of the day, this group of people who were monstrous, demons even, committed a massive amount of bloodshed and misery. And then when the going got tough, they sold that bloodshed and misery to the highest bidder and got off scot-free. So, ain't that a kick in the pants? Now again, none of this was public information, and it would have stayed that way if it wasn't for the work of various Japanese historians. See, again, Unit 731 for years was like a boogeyman. There would be a researcher come out in like the 60s or 70s talking about how the project was real, or they were a part of it and they can attest to it. And they would get laughed off by the media, saying that they were just some crazy conspiracy theorist. Historians pulled various records in Japan that supported the government's sanctioning of Unit 731. And in 1983, a historian published his findings and was told by the Japanese Board of Education that he should take those findings out of textbooks because it's not backed historically. So these historians went to the United States, and now, because everything's declassified, went through various records and found MacArthur's immunity deals and the records that he got directly from the Unit 731 experiments, and were able to bring those records back to Japan, show them to the Board of Education, and say, it's real, it's all right here. And from then on, the Japanese government slowly began to admit fault in the Unit 731 experiments. Through the 1990s, the Japanese government...
See, it would have been different if it was like a militia, or like an underground, like, say there was like a higher up in the military that had like a fucking, you know what I mean? But what the fuck? The actual military itself completely, like,
finally
bro, what
it
the
was a real
fuck?
thing, but not
That
the
is so
specifics
fucked.
of what the researchers actually did. The most recent development
That
of
is
Unit
insane.
731 was in 2018, when the Japanese government named the 3,607 researchers who were a part of the
Yeah,
unit.
like that's
And as you can
like the fact
imagine,
that they
between-
like, you know, somebody fucking signed something for that to all be
all
like, that's
3,607
fucked.
of those names, they're all either
That's
dead
insane,
or
bro.
have disappeared. Shiro Ishii, if you'll remember, the leader of all of Unit 731, died on October the 9th of 1959 from laryngeal cancer, never experiencing judgment on this side of eternity for his role in the Japanese war crimes. And Unit 731, like I said at the beginning of this video, is depressing. There's no two ways about it. There's no happy ending. There's no good side to it. It was a group of people committed atrocities, and they got away with it, effectively. And there's no polish I can give that. But what I can give polish is that this story was almost entirely lost for history. If you were from World
Yeah,
War
that's
II,
pretty
from the-
insane. Yeah,
these
bro, if
events
they
happened-
honestly, bro, if they like, you know, if like the US continued to drop bombs, like I wouldn't even be surprised if a lot of this would have just been erased completely because of just everybody in the area getting vaporized and everything getting vaporized. You wouldn't really. Wow,
up until like 1984, when it
that's
finally became
fucked,
official,
bro.
the people who died never died, at least publicly. Their names were just lost as some of the many names lost in
Wow.
World War II. And they were just a statistical
Well, I guess
anomaly
records were way
because
different back
governments
then.
didn't
It
want
was
to acknowledge the atrocities that they
paper
had
and
once
shit.
condoned, or that the forerunners before them had condoned. And of course, obviously, I don't mean any of my critiques of the Japanese government during World War II to apply to now. But again,
That fucker never
was
answered for this
less
shit,
than
but
a
at least he
century
suffered
ago.
before he
It's hard
died.
to think
Yeah.
about that humanity
That's really
is
fucked
capable
though,
of
man.
that kind of evil and that kind of justification for that kind of evil. But the point I want to bring out, the one light in all of it,
Like, what the hell would,
is
like, what the
people
fuck?
who would not be quiet, the people who kept learning, who kept digging, and now we have names of the perpetrators, and we have death of the victims. We have cause of the victims. And while it doesn't make it right, and the suffering still happened, it gives some meaning to it. Their names are not simply
Yeah.
lost; they were taken. And hopefully, by understanding why they were taken and what great evil led to it, we can prevent tragedies like that from ever happening again. And like I said, Unit 731 is a heavy story, but it's one that I think should be told. Not one I enjoy telling. I didn't have a good time recording this, I'll be honest. But it's one that needs to
Mhm.
be. And I'm just a lowly
Jesus,
YouTuber.
bro.
I'm no one important. I'm no one special. But hopefully you got something out of this. Or at least you have more depressing knowledge to terrorize your friends with, which in that case, win-win. But either way, if you got something out of this, or you just like to be miserable like I do, I guess, that's cool. And I just want to say thank you for watching. Thank you all so much for sticking around and watching the video. I know I promised that the Ted Kaczynski video would be next, but that video is becoming a much larger project with a lot of really cool things that I've never done before, and it's taking more time. So hopefully whenever it does come out, you all will be excited and it will be worth the wait. I hope you like that teaser in the ad, and hopefully that made the rest of this video not as depressing. But if you made it this far, I appreciate it, and I hope it wasn't that much of a bummer. And I want to emphasize, while I talk about a lot of the disturbing and worst parts of humanity, I am talking about the outliers. I am talking about the strange parts. Humanity, just as capable as it is for infinite evil, is capable of infinite good. And don't let yourself get, you know, in a headspace about how terrible the world can be, but get in a space about how great it can be as well. I recently, I'll brag a little bit, my fiance Kayla just graduated with her doctoral, so she's a doctor now, and that's incredible, and I'm proud of her. And it helps seeing people like her, people who strive, people who have power and diligence and strength. And it really is easy to take your mind off the terrible when there's so much good to be found. So again, I hope it didn't get you that sad, and if it did, I'm sorry. But I hope that you enjoyed.
Nah, I'm chilling. I just
Shorter
can't
video for
believe
now, but like I said, Ted on the
like what we
way.
just talked about, Loki.
There'll probably
That's
be another
fucked.
video in between this one and the Ted one, because like I said, that's becoming a big one. But expect the Ted video in June, and hopefully you enjoyed that. But until then, I just want to say
Good
thank
video
you for
though.
watching.
A lot of information.
Hopefully you
It
enjoyed,
would have taken a lot of time to
and
do
I will
that.
see you in the next one. Bye.
It set someone on fire and watches it die screaming can just go, huh? Curious out how every detail of German atrocity is common knowledge, but things like this occurring simultaneously in Japan are almost... Yeah, that's pretty fucked. And as Nazi Germany or fascist Italy in terms of their atrocities against humanity, but they absolutely deserve to be mentioned in those same conversations. Yeah, that's pretty fucked. I didn't know that. Yeah. Was not aware of these things.